Good morning and welcome to the September 23rd, 2024 Finance Committee meeting for the Lee Summit School District. We'll begin with item 1.01, contracts of $15,000 and less. Is a fairly lengthy list this month, but highlighted significantly and mostly with agreements between the school district and other school districts or other educational institutions. Just want to highlight the agreement with Center School District and between Center School District and STA, Summit Tech Academy, also MCC, the Metropolitan Community College, and the school district for a number of advanced courses and college level courses. And then lastly, between Summit Christian Academy and the school district. And we appreciate those relationships that we have with other school districts and other educational institutions. Are there any questions about items that are on this list? All right, not hearing any questions, we'll move on to item 1.02, contracts $15,000 and greater. As a reminder, items that are new or the renewal is above the CPI, those will be discussed later in this meeting. So as you can see, this list is a really short list. The only item that's on here that won't be discussed later is, I believe, the very first item. Are there any questions about the items that are on this list? We'll discuss them a little bit later on in the meeting. All right, moving on then to 1.03, Junior Bus Tours Incorporated. Mrs. Battaglia, good morning.
Good morning. The purchasing department maintains a list of vetted student travel vendors, bus tours, so on and so forth. And these vendors provide us with a lot of information about their company, background checks, certificates of insurance, and so on. And we keep that list for the buildings so that anytime that they're in the need for student travel, they can look at the list and be rest assured that they've been thoroughly vetted through our department and then work with that vendor going forward. Manhattan Tour and Travel was one of those vendors that we'd had on the list since 2019, and they were recently acquired by Junior Bus Tours. We reached out to them once we found out that they had Junior Bus Tours had taken over that company and properly vetted them as well. And we're just bringing this forward to let you know that there was a change in one of those vendors, and they were properly vetted, and we've added them to the list, and just wanted to be forthcoming and let you know that there was a change out there and make you aware of, the process that we had gone through to add them to the list. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for your due diligence. Important process for us to follow as vendors work directly with our students and our staff. We want to make sure they're safe and in good hands. Thank you. All right, moving on to 1.04, Microsoft enrollment of educational services. Dr. Whaley.
All right, good morning, everybody. So this is our annual Microsoft licensing renewal. And what that includes is our licensing for our servers, which usually stays the same from year to year. We may fluctuate between 1 and 3 licenses. It's also some data systems, tools that they use on the back end to run our servers. But the significant part about this is the licensing for our staff to use Office 365 and then also our students. And so the way Microsoft licensing works is if we license all of our staff, there's a ratio. So many student licenses are free for each staff license you subscribe to. So teachers, staff, obviously, we still use Microsoft Office 365, even though we're also a Google district. And so by licensing all those users, you'll see in the quote, they give us around 40,000 student licenses for free. And that's just how the ratios work out. So this year we got a price quote back, which was a substantial increase to that staff license. Working with CDW, each year they are a great resource for us because they actually have a team that digs into our licensing to make sure that we're not overpaying for services that we no longer use or things like that. But we asked why the substantial increase. A couple of years ago, so here's what we learned. A couple of years ago, Microsoft began changing their pricing structure for all users. That's personal, business, and education. And what happened was last year, CDW quoted us under the old pricing, realized it later, and didn't come back and say, hey, by the way, we quoted you wrong. You should have been paying more last year. So therefore, we knew we were going to see a bigger increase this year because of that. So they missed a year under that new pricing structure. So there's where we are today. So that's the reason for the increase. If you go out and look at a private license, we're still getting Office 365 at about a third. It's a 40% of the cost of an actual personal license. And that's all I have on that. So I'll take any questions. All righty, thank you.
All right. Dr. Whaley, thank you. This is an example. That agenda item is an example of an item that was pulled into our discussion because the increase was above the CPI. And very, very clear explanation as to why that increase occurred. Thank you, Dr. Whaley. All right, moving on to 05, Mrs. McMillan.
All right, good morning. So the district, we currently use WellWorks for our employee well-being platform, but that contract expires at the end of this calendar year. So following board procedures for purchasing, CBIZ, the district's insurance consultant, solicited 3 quotes for us. We evaluated those quotes. We interviewed 2 of the 3 vendors. We interviewed Wellable and WellWorks. We are recommending moving forward with Wellable. One, they are the least expensive. However, they do provide more services than WellWorks provides. And there is potential for future cost savings within our employee well-being program by using Wellable. So I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. McMillan. We have an incredible wellness program in our school district, and she and her team do a great job leading that, along with a number of other employees around the school district. Moving on to 1.06, earlier in the meeting, we highlighted the partnerships that we enjoy around the area with the examples that were listed earlier with the Center School District, with Summit Tech Academy, and with Summit Christian Academy at Summit Tech Academy, and of course with Metropolitan Community College and all the courses that our students have access to there. This is an example, another example of the partnerships that we enjoy in our community. As you know, the school district has started a fire academy at Summit Tech Academy, and it's a program that is growing quickly. The need and demand for firefighters is high. It's a high wage, high skill career. And within that program, we have developed a partnership with the Lee Summit Fire Department. This is a memo of understanding between the school district and Lee Summit Fire Department, the city of Lee Summit, and it outlines the understanding of the shared use of equipment, the shared use of personnel, and the shared use of space between the school district and the fire department. We will be using equipment from the fire department. We will be using space from the fire department, and we will be using personnel from the fire department. This agreement has been worked out between the district staff and the city staff, the fire department, as well as Joe Hatley, our attorney, and the attorney from the city. That being said, are there any questions about this memo of understanding?
Dr. Shelton, I was just curious when this program will be available to our students. Is that next semester or next school year?
It actually has already started. And, as we start the semester, there haven't been any really opportunities to share equipment or staff or space with the city. And so we've been working on this memo of understanding for the better part of a year and a half. And just now starting to come together, but it has started. We have students enrolled, and we have an instructor and very, very, very talented instructor, retired firefighter, and a retired fire instructor from the Kansas side who's come over and he's working with our program.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. No further questions. We'll move on to section 2, finance, and we'll turn over this section to Mr. Holder.
Good morning, everyone. I'm trying to turn my video on, Dr. Shelton, and it won't let me. It says the host has stopped it. Oh, there we go.
Here. All
All
right.
right.
Thank you.
It might have been better without it, but thank you. So the first item of business we have is the transfer of funds. If you remember in July, we did not have a transfer, which is very typical because we don't have a lot of Fund 2 expenses. This is the transfer that we do to cover those expenses each month. And so sometimes in August we do not, but if we do, it's generally very small. And so you see that reflected here. We do have a very small transfer of $168,627. So now as we go through into September, which we'll do next month, you will see that bounce back up into the millions. And that will be fairly typical for us every month. The only exceptions are occasionally when we get revenue in that's more one-time revenue in Fund 2, then it will lower that amount on a monthly basis. So again, small transfer of $168,627. Any questions on that? All right. We'll dive into the treasurer's report. Start with the revenue and expense. Just a reminder, this is through August. So we have 2 months worth of expenses. This also includes our first large Fund 2 payment because it includes the first payment on our teacher contracts that happened on August 28th. And it reflects probably, I would say, well over 95% of our payroll. The only exception is we do have some positions that receive their first paycheck on September 13th. And so that will be reflected next month in the report. And at that point, then we'll have the full payroll in. Just a reminder, what we look at on this report is typically where we're at year to date, which is through the first 2 months. But then also, just as importantly, we look back at the same point last year. So what's also reflected is 2 months into FY24, which was last fiscal year. So if we start at revenue up top, and we'll just move across from left to right, you can see our Fund 1 revenue is slightly under, as well as our Fund 2 in terms of percentages. Now, again, and I'll say this on expense, it's very early to really look too hard at percentages, but what we often do when we see a lower amount is, we look at why. And just a reminder, I think I mentioned this last month, in July of 2023, we received a payment that was late from the state for some special education and title funds. And so as we look at a year to year, that's kind of artificially inflated the revenue from last year as it compares to this year. So the bottom line is I think we're tracking very closely to what we would anticipate. Debt service, again, just a little bit lower. We'll see how that comes in And we'll definitely continue to monitor that. Bond fund, of course, just a reminder that that bond fund revenue will remain constant. And in fact, we may remove that eventually from this report because we won't be receiving any more revenue or expensing any more from the bond fund. Capital projects, again, as you would expect, primarily the nickel levy, as well as just some ancillary revenue items have come into the capital projects and tracking very closely to where we were at this point last year. Then going over to our restricted funds, nutrition services, just slightly ahead from a percentage standpoint. Activity and foundation, the same. Just remember though that we anticipate the activity and foundation fund to really be level at the end of the year. And so it will fluctuate up and down. But the goal is not to grow that balance. It's really to have it be pretty level from year to year. But then before and after school services, our goal is to, we've been working on this for over 3 years now to get that fund back to the positive, and we continue to make progress on that. You'll see the revenues just a little bit ahead from a percentage standpoint of where we were last year. So going back down to the expense column, again, starting on the left, from the operating fund standpoint, again, I caution that it's very early, but I still like to see that percentage where it's at. It's almost a full percent below as a comparison where we were last year. So again, very early, but I'll take it. It's a positive sign. On the special revenue fund, we're slightly above. Now, 0.07% at this point. We're not going to get too nervous about that. We know that some one-time expenses that hit in July and August were a little bit higher year over year than they were the year previous. So, but we'll continue to watch that and really, as we reach those milestones, especially October, because that's a 3/4 point in terms of your teacher salary, because you've had August, September, October, then that starts to come into a little bit better focus. Debt service, again, just a function very close to where we were at this point last year, and that's based on the schedule that we follow and the payments that we make. Bond, again, is finished. You won't see that number change. It will stay the same, and eventually we'll probably drop that column off for the purposes of this report. Capital projects, just want to highlight that. You notice that's a lot higher, but that we planned for that. Our budget was higher in capital projects. A lot of projects going on this summer. You'll see that number rise a little bit more in September, because a lot of that summer work we don't get final billing on until the month of September. But from a dollar perspective, we still have quite a bit of cushion there. There's also a large bus payment. We bought over $3 million, or paid over $3 million to purchase 23 buses. That's reflected in there. So what you'll see again next month, that'll jump up a little bit more, and then you'll really see that level out. We'll have a lease payment in there for MIC. We get reimbursed for that, but it still shows up as an expense. But all of our other capital expenses really from October through May are pretty level, except for that lease payment that will jump up. And then we see a little bit more in June again, because we're starting on some summer work towards the end of May. Nutrition services, again, very early, but from an expense standpoint, percentages look good there. Activity and foundation, a little bit higher, but again, our revenue is a little bit higher, so that tracks with what we would expect. And then before and after school services, a little higher from a percentage standpoint. Again, we're in a unique situation there where we make an estimate based on the employees that we have to start the year. Employees that leave our before and after school program, they're replaced with YMCA employees. And so we're actually, I believe, less than 10 school district employees. So that's a little bit of an estimate. We'll track it throughout the year, and if we need to raise that expense a little bit, we will. But the bottom line is our revenues are exceeding expenses in that category. Going down to the bottom right, again, just our restricted funds. You can see nutrition services as it compares to last year, and we knew this, we would be down a little bit, but we hope to see that trend really level out this year. And if it goes down, that we're not going to see the drop that we did the previous year. Activity and foundation, very similar from a dollar standpoint of what's in those balances. And then again, before and after school services, just to highlight there the progress we've made when we look at a year ago in August to right now, we have closed the gap by almost $400,000 in that fund. Then going over to the far left, again, you'll see our operating balances. And as we would anticipate, this kind of tracks with where we ended the fiscal year with FY24. You can see just a little bit lower, just under $5 million in our fund balance reserve. One other note I want to make: in September, you'll see that number go even lower. And then October, it gets to its lowest point. November, it stays about the same, but it probably goes up a little bit just because at the very end of November, sometimes we get some local revenue. But then in December, you'll see it jump back up, January, February. And then from February on, we just kind of see the percent go back down. And where we end in June is where we end our fiscal year. It's very common for us just because we are so dependent on local revenue for our budget. And we don't really receive that until December and January. Any questions on the revenue and expense report? All right. Really not a lot of new to report on the investment report. But we are starting to focus a little bit, and I've talked about this really for several months now, is trying to go ahead and lock some rates in. It's hard to do because, our liquid rate has been higher than anything we could get on the term. So again, when I say liquid, that's money that's in an account that we could get our hands on the next day. That percentage rate of return has actually been higher than anything that we could do going from 3 months out to 5 years, which is very rare. But what happened last Wednesday, as most of you are probably aware, the Federal Reserve cut the target rate by 50 basis points, or 0.5%. So we'll start to see that level out. We're still in a kind of a weird scenario, although it's been this way for several years, where the return on a 1-year treasury is higher than a 2-year or 3-year. So that will eventually turn around, and as interest rates go down, as they're expected to do, we none of us know for sure, but if they continue to go down slightly, then that curve may become less inverted and more normal. So the challenge for us is, we want to try to hit the sweet spot, if you will, of where we place our monies. And in the overall picture, really the goal, though, is just to get a target return. And so as you see, we'll probably start to purchase some investments that are in that 3.5% to 4% range that go out 3 years or longer. The most we can go is 5, but that provides us a pretty nice consistent rate of return. And as you look at the historicals, that would be a good rate of return for us. While balancing that with the fact that, again, our liquid is the highest rate right now. So if there's not a lot of motivation to continue to invest, other than we know for the longer term beyond just next month, it's probably a good move for us in the long run. Again, the bond funds, I just want to highlight at the bottom, those are spent, they're done. So the bond proceeds, again, eventually we'll take that off in the coming months. And you'll see that total. Any questions on the investment report? All right, the last item is the balance sheet. Really, as we look at the bottom here, this is a reflection of what we just talked about on the revenue and expense report. But I do want to highlight on capital projects. You'll notice that is actually a negative. Just keep in mind that that's on paper. And the reason for that, though, is if you remember from the expense report that we just went over, we had a lot of capital expenses hit this summer. And so the revenue to that will eventually catch up. But we don't receive our merchants and manufacturing revenue until typically February. And so that nickel that we have in capital projects, in the big picture, that's $1.7 million on 100% tax collection rate. So yes, we will receive a lot of that by January, but it's not enough to really make the difference. The merchants and manufacturing is where we get a large chunk of our revenue. We'll hit that in February. And then we will also get the transfer at the end of the year. Now, I would anticipate that by March or April, we'll be back above zero, and then whatever we end up transferring, we'll just raise that balance. But I just wanted to point that out. I don't want you to be alarmed by that. We knew that we were going to spend a lot up front over the summer in capital projects. And again, that's roofs, HVAC work, parking lots, all those types of things. And so as we go, that number will stay negative for several months. But then once we get to February, it'll get close to back to zero, if not over. And then as we go through the year and we make that final transfer in June, it will become a positive. Any questions on the balance sheet? All right. The next item we have is our tax rate hearing. And just so Board Member Haley and Board Member Eslick, I know you're aware, at the tax rate hearing, I will do about a 10-minute presentation that will have a lot more detail, some slides that kind of go in a little bit of the historical, as well as the how we compare to other school districts, what the impact of the new levy will be, and all those sorts of things. But Dr. Shelton, if we can get on the tax rate hearing notice and go ahead and pull that up, there's just some things on that I can highlight right now. So if you look there on the right-hand side, you've got the prior tax year, 2023. And then our current tax year, 2024. So these are bills that all property owners will receive typically early November from the county. And the tax rate that we set then is reflected on those bills. So if you look at the prior tax year for real estate, and we'll just start with real estate, that's up just a little over $11 million. All right. There's a little bit of a caveat to that. The personal property is up about a little over $5 million, about 5.4. So just a slight increase in personal property. Typically that's newer vehicles coming on or more vehicles coming on, because the actual value of personal property, we had that one year a few years ago during COVID where that really spiked with the value, primarily vehicles, is what there's more to personal property than just cars and trucks, but that's the largest part. for not an individual. Business can also have personal property, but for an individual, it's their vehicles. But that's really leveled out, and so a very small increase there. So when you combine it, you're looking at just over about a $16 million increase for real estate and personal property. But then if you go down, you see new construction and improvements that are included in those totals above were over $52.4 million. So if you look at personal property, remember we know that went up a little over 5, and that's included in that $52.4 million number. So you back that out, and basically you're left with just under $47 million that existing property, all right, not new property, but existing property actually dropped in value. And so typically that's because of appeals that get settled after we receive the assessed valuations the year previous, that number is dropped. So when you look at existing property, the rate, because those values go down, your ceiling actually rises because you're never penalized for new construction, because that's new on the tax rolls. That wasn't there the year previous. And so you're allowed to capture as a district all of that revenue. But the revenue for existing property, you're actually held harmless in terms of it won't drop, but you don't get any additional from that. So the result of that is basically that existing property dropped a little over 1%, and that's reflected in my narration there on the tax rate board agenda item. But the impact of that then is that as you see our prior tax year rate and our existing rate, the incidental fund, which is really where you see the difference, is going up just under 7 cents. All right, a little less than 7 cents. And so our debt service remains the same. Going back up one, we don't place a levy in the teacher fund, which is very common. Most school districts do not. And then capital projects, we've been placing a nickel in there ever since I've been here and several years prior to that. Just a reminder that incidental teacher and capital projects in the eyes of the state is all considered operating. And so you could actually move those amounts around within those 3 areas, and you're not locked into that. Debt service is different. It's its own levy that's calculated every year. And so our goal as a district is always to leave that constant. So there's not a fluctuation, but in operating, we know there will be. And again, we've seen that over the course of the last 10 years, our operating levy has dropped well over $1. Now, just a reminder, as part of that, last year we rolled back 65 cents voluntarily. This year we're rolling back just over 60 cents voluntarily. The difference between last year and this year is by doing it this year, it becomes permanent for 2025 tax year. So that becomes our new ceiling. It will also be our ceiling in 2026, and cannot be raised without board action. So that 60-cent voluntary rollback becomes permanent until the board, and it has to be an agenda item in September, would have to choose to go back and raise that ceiling. So a little, well, not a little difference, a big difference, because last year, again, we knew that we rolled back 65 cents voluntarily, because that's what would have happened if we hadn't been at the ballot in April of 2023. But there was no permanency to it. This year there will be, in terms of next year in 2025, we won't have that option. So again, the end result is just a little over a 7-cent increase. you all will see this on the presentation Thursday. I have a slide that kind of illustrates what that means. So 7 cents for a homeowner, if the market value of $300,000 is just under $40, the increase that would be for the year. Obviously, if your market value of your home is higher, then it would be a little more. If it's lower, it's going to be a little less. And again, just remember, market value is not always a reflection of what you think you could sell your home for. Most of us would be sorely disappointed if that were the case and we went to sell our property. Again, at the tax rate hearing, all this information will be there, but then I'll have some about 12 slides kind of go over and go into this just a little bit more. Any questions?
Mr. Holder, that 60-cent rollback equates to what, about a $20 million savings for our taxpayers?
22 million.
22.
Yep.
The 60 cents does? 22.
Yes.
Okay. So saving our taxpayers $22 million.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Holder. Moving on to section 3, facilities. Mr. Gurrell.
Thank you. Just got one quick item this month.
Oh, Mr. Gurrell,
Yes.
a little bit of feedback or I tell you what, why don't you let me, we're having a really difficult time hearing you. Let me take this one, and if there's something that you need to jump in on, we'll give. Okay, now you're muted. Yep, can't hear you. Okay, all right, very good. Hannah, if you don't mind, if you would, here in just a moment, we'll open up the items here, but you can see that we have a change order with the will pave to the tune of about $65,000. This change order is driven almost entirely by meeting city code, city ordinance. As we get into projects, there are items that come to our attention that we need to do to meet city code and city ordinance. And in this change order, that's just $65,000 change order, you'll find the result, the cost of meeting the city code and city ordinance. Are there any questions about this change order? All right. Thank you, Ms. Pruitt. Before we wrap up, board member Eslick, board member Haley, any last minute questions, anything that we need to cover before we end our meeting?
Not from me. I appreciate everybody coming together and putting this call together and all the information. Very thorough.
Agreed. Very thorough, Dr. Shelton.
Thank
Appreciate it, Mr. Holder, and everyone that presented. Thank you very much.
We have a wonderful team, work very hard to make sure that we provide a great education for our students and great support for our staff and great environment for our community to enjoy a great educational system and school district.
Dr. Shelton?
Yes, sir.
I apologize. I forgot to mention something that I wanted to highlight on the contracts under 15,000.
Yes.
It's buried in there because it's no cost to us, but I just wanted to highlight it because it's a positive. There's an agreement in there with Clean Energy. They are able to capture some tax credits for renewable energy. And as a result of that, it will generate some revenue for us. This is in addition to the alternative fuel tax credit. So this is a separate item. It's a small amount, but it's expected to generate between $20,000 and $30,000 a year. So with this agreement, that should start in November. So a small amount, but still it's nice to be able to receive that. And again, there's no cost to the district for that item. Thank
bet.
you. Sorry, I forgot. I meant to mention that earlier and I just thought of it.
Not at all. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. All right, hearing no further questions or comments, we will conclude our Finance Committee meeting. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shelton.
Thank you.